Sarah had just turned 18. The small town she lived in felt like a cage, its bars made of routine and expectation. Summer stretched ahead, endless and shimmering with possibility, yet tinged with a peculiar boredom. Her friends were all making plans, college visits, summer jobs in the city, adventures that seemed impossibly glamorous. Sarah, however, felt stuck. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her. There were no secrets, no surprises. Except perhaps for Mark, her neighbor. He was older, maybe in his mid-30s, and kept to himself. He was the kind of attractive that made the moms in the neighborhood whisper, a bit mysterious, a bit dangerous. He always seemed to be working on something in his yard, fixing up his house, or just relaxing. Sarah found herself taking longer walks, making sure her route took her past his backyard. It wasn't intentional, not really. It was just a way to pass the time, to see something different. A small break from the monotony. Mark's house was different from the others on the block. It wasn't run down, exactly, but it had a certain, lived-in quality. The lawn was always neatly mowed, but the flower beds were a riot of color, untamed and overflowing. He seemed to favor dark colors. His car was a deep blue, his house a muted gray with black trim. It added to the aura of mystery. He wasn't much of a talker, at least not with Sarah. She'd only exchanged a few words with him over the years, a quick hello when retrieving a stray ball from his yard, a polite nod as they passed on the street. But his eyes were something else. They were a deep, dark brown, and they seemed to see right through her. He wasn't overtly friendly, but never rude, just reserved. He was always working on some project. She'd see him hammering away at his deck, tending to his garden, or washing his car with a focused intensity. Everything he did seemed deliberate, controlled. The walks became a ritual. Each afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Sarah would lace up her sneakers and head out. She told herself she was exercising, getting some fresh air. But deep down, she knew the real reason. She wanted to see Mark. She started noticing details she hadn't before. The way the sun glinted off his dark hair, the strength in his arms as he lifted heavy bags of soil, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. She even started imagining conversations with him, witty exchanges that would reveal his hidden depths. Sometimes, she'd catch him looking back at her. A fleeting glance, a subtle acknowledgement. It was enough to make her heart skip a beat. She wondered if he knew she was watching him, if he understood the reason for her sudden interest in his backyard. Maybe he was just amused by the naive girl who was so obviously smitten. Or maybe he felt something too. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Then came the day that changed everything. It was hotter than usual, the air thick and heavy with humidity. As Sarah rounded the corner onto Mark Street, she saw him. He was in his backyard, in the hot tub. The steam curled around him like a hazy cloud, partially obscuring him from view. He was shirtless. The sight stopped her in her tracks. She'd seen him working in his yard before, but never like this. The water shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting off his tanned skin. She could see the muscles in his arms and chest, the way the water droplets clung to his hair. It was a picture, a moment frozen in time. Something snapped inside her. A feeling of boldness, of recklessness, washed over her. The boredom, the frustration, the unspoken desires, they all coalesced into a single, impulsive thought. She couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. She just knew what she had to do. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated impulse. Without a second thought, she pushed open the gate to his backyard. It creaked slightly, the sound amplified in the still air. She walked with a newfound confidence, each step deliberate and purposeful. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of excitement and fear coursing through her veins. The hot tub was closer now, the steam swirling around her, enveloping her in its warmth. She could see Mark more clearly now, his expression unreadable. She walked right up to the edge of the tub, her gaze fixed on his. It was a silent challenge, a dare. She didn't hesitate. She kicked off her sneakers, pulled off her socks, and stepped into the hot tub. The water was hot, almost scalding, but she didn't flinch. She moved with a grace she didn't know she possessed, settling into the bubbling water across from him. The water level rose slightly, and she could feel the heat intensifying. This was it. There was no turning back now. Mark simply stared. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled back into that familiar, unreadable mask. It was a look of stunned silence, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. He didn't say a word, didn't move a muscle. He just watched her, his dark eyes fixed on her face. She could feel the intensity of his gaze burning into her. It was unnerving, but also exciting. She met his stare head-on, refusing to look away. She wanted him to see her, to really see her, not just as the girl next door, but as someone else, something more. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the bubbling of the water. It felt like an eternity, a suspended moment where anything could happen. She wondered what he was thinking, what he was going to do. Was he angry? Amused? Intrigued? She couldn't tell. His expression gave nothing away. It was all up to her now. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, though her heart was pounding like a drum against her ribs. "Thought I'd join you," she said, her voice coming out a little breathier than she intended. She hoped she sounded confident, maybe even a little flirty. In reality, she felt like a deer caught in headlights. The steam swirled around them, a silent accomplice to the unfolding scene. The air crackled with unspoken tension. She watched Mark carefully, searching for any sign of what he was thinking. His eyes flickered down to her body, then back up to her face. She couldn't decipher the look in them. She shifted slightly in the water, trying to ease the awkwardness. The heat was starting to get to her, making her skin prickle and her head feel light. But she refused to break the eye contact. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She wanted to see what would happen, to push the boundaries, to experience something new. The steam rose, carrying with it the weight of their unspoken desires. The initial moments were excruciatingly awkward. The bubbling water seemed to mock the silence between them, a constant reminder of the unusual situation. Sarah tried to find something to focus on, anything to distract herself from Mark's piercing gaze and the rapid thump-thump-thump of her heart. She noticed the small details of the hot tub, the worn edges of the plastic, the faint chlorine smell, the way the jets churned the water into a frothy white mess. She even tried counting the jets, a futile attempt to regain some semblance of control. Mark still hadn't said a word. His silence was a heavy blanket, smothering the air and making it hard to breathe. She could feel the weight of his gaze scrutinizing her, judging her. She wondered if he regretted letting her in, if he wished she had never come. The doubt gnawed at her, threatening to unravel her newfound confidence. But she held her ground, determined to see this through, whatever the outcome. Inside, Sarah was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of her was terrified. What had she done? Was she completely insane? She imagined the gossip, the whispers, the judgment of the small town if anyone found out. Another part of her, though, was exhilarated. She had broken free, defied expectations, taken a risk. She also questioned his intentions. Was he going to ask her to leave? Was he secretly pleased? Did he see her as a foolish kid, or something more? She replayed the moment she saw him, shirtless and relaxed, the steam rising around him like a halo. It had been so alluring. She wondered if she had misread the signals, if her fantasies had blinded her to reality. But then she looked at him again, at the way his eyes seemed to darken as they met hers, and she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy, impulsive act wouldn't be a complete disaster. Maybe it would be the start of something interesting. Finally, he spoke. His voice was deeper than she expected, a low rumble that vibrated through the water. "So," he said, his eyes still fixed on hers, "you're 18 now." It wasn't a question, but a statement. An acknowledgement. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Yeah," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. He paused, as if considering his next words. Big plans for the summer? He asked, his tone casual, almost conversational. It was such an ordinary question, so completely at odds with the extraordinary situation. She almost laughed. Maybe, she said, a playful glint in her eyes. Depends. She let the word hang in the air, a silent invitation. She could feel the heat rising, not just from the water, but from the unspoken tension that crackled between them. The air seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. What would he say next? What would he do? She held her breath, waiting. Depends on what? He asked, his voice a low murmur, almost lost in the bubbling of the water. He leaned back against the side of the tub, his arms resting on the edge, the muscles in his arms flexing slightly. He was watching her intently, his gaze unwavering. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Depends on whether I'm still stuck in this town, she said, her tone a mix of defiance and longing. Depends on whether anything interesting happens. She emphasized the word interesting, letting it linger in the air between them. She watched his expression carefully, searching for any sign that he understood what she was implying. A slight smile played on his lips, a subtle acknowledgement. And what would you consider interesting? He asked, his voice laced with amusement. She shrugged again, trying to maintain her air of nonchalance. You know, she said, her eyes meeting his, a direct challenge. Something different. Something unexpected. She let the silence hang between them, a silent dare. The steam continued to rise, blurring the edges of reality and intensifying the unspoken desires that simmered beneath the surface. The air crackled with a new kind of energy, a playful tension that replaced the initial awkwardness. Sarah felt a surge of confidence, a thrill at pushing the boundaries and seeing how Mark would react. She was no longer just the girl next door, she was someone else. Someone bolder, someone more aware of her own power. She leaned back against the side of the tub, mimicking his relaxed posture. Maybe, she said, her voice a low purr. Interesting means finally doing something I'm not supposed to. She let her gaze drift down his body, a deliberate act of flirtation. He chuckled softly, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. And what makes you think you're not supposed to be here? He asked, his eyes sparkling with amusement. She met his gaze head-on, her lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. Isn't it obvious? She said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm 18. You're... She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Not. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken meaning, a silent acknowledgement of the power dynamic that had shifted between them. He looked away for a moment, breaking their intense eye contact. She could see a flicker of something in his expression, hesitation, perhaps, or maybe even a hint of concern. He was clearly aware of the implications of her words, of the line she was so deliberately trying to cross. You're right, he said finally, his voice softer now, almost regretful. It's complicated. Complicated is interesting, she countered, her voice a playful challenge. She reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingertips barely brushing against his skin. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to send a jolt of electricity through her. He tensed slightly at her touch, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable once again. She could feel him pulling back, resisting the pull. But she could also see the undeniable spark of attraction in his eyes, the curiosity that she had ignited. She was testing the waters, pushing the boundaries, and he was letting her. At least for now. What about you? She asked, her voice softer now, the playful edge fading. What are your plans for the summer? He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Same as always, I guess, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of weariness. Work. Maybe a weekend trip somewhere. Sounds exciting, she said, a touch of sarcasm in her voice. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. A vulnerability, a hint of sadness. It's not, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I feel stuck too, you know? Just, in a different way. She felt a sudden pang of empathy for him. He wasn't just a mysterious older neighbor. He was a person, with his own hopes and dreams and disappointments. What would you do? She asked, her voice gentle. If you weren't stuck? He hesitated for a moment, then looked at her, a spark of something, longing, in his eyes. I don't know, he said, his voice honest and raw. I haven't let myself think about it in a long time. The steam swirled around them, a silent witness to their shared vulnerability. The water sloshed gently as Sarah shifted, her leg accidentally brushing against his. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her body. She quickly pulled away, her cheeks flushing. He didn't say anything, but she saw his eyes darken, his jaw tighten. The accidental touch had broken some kind of barrier, making the air even more charged than before. The heat from the water, combined with the unspoken tension, was almost unbearable. They found themselves holding each other's gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. She could see the desire in his eyes, the longing, the same yearning that she felt inside. The world seemed to shrink, to narrow down to just the two of them, suspended in the steamy heat of the hot tub. The silence stretched, heavy and pregnant with possibilities. She could feel the pull, the undeniable attraction drawing them closer. It felt like they were on the edge of something dangerous and exciting. Another accidental brush of their legs, this time, either of them pulled away. The air crackled with unspoken promises. You know, he said, his voice low and husky, breaking the spell. I've noticed you, Sarah. She held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. It was out in the open now, the unspoken acknowledgement that had been hanging between them for so long. I mean, he continued, his gaze intense, I've noticed you're not a kid anymore. He paused, as if searching for the right words. You've changed. A slow smile spread across her face. Is that a good thing? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He chuckled softly, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Definitely, he said, his eyes locking with hers. Definitely a good thing. His words were like a key, unlocking something inside her. She felt a surge of confidence, a sense of power. He had noticed her. He had seen her transformation. And he approved. The realization was intoxicating. The air shimmered with possibility, the steam swirling around them like a veil, obscuring the world outside and drawing them further into their own private reality. Her newfound confidence emboldened her. She leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them. So, she said, her voice a husky whisper, what are you going to do about it? She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a hint of uncertainty. He was still holding back, still resisting the pull. She decided to push him, to challenge him. You said it's complicated, she continued, her voice soft but firm. But complicated doesn't have to be a bad thing. What are you so afraid of? He looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. She could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. He wanted her, she knew it. But something was holding him back. She reached out and gently took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. Don't be, she whispered, her eyes locking with his. Don't be afraid to want something different. Don't be afraid of me. The steam swirled around them, a silent plea, a desperate hope. She was challenging him to step outside his comfort zone, to embrace the unknown. The choice was his. He looked at their intertwined hands, then back up at her face, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and trepidation. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken desires and unasked questions. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. It felt like they were on the precipice of something momentous. A kiss, a confession, a complete surrender. She could almost taste it, the thrill of the forbidden, the allure of the unknown. He opened his mouth to speak, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment she thought he was going to say it, to confess his feelings, to give in to the desire that was so clearly evident between them. The air crackled with anticipation, the steam swirling around them like a protective cocoon. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them, suspended in this moment of intense, almost unbearable, anticipation. It felt like time had stopped, holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Would he kiss her? Would he tell her how he really felt? The suspense was almost unbearable. Suddenly, the shrill ring of a cell phone shattered the spell. Mark flinched, his eyes widening in surprise. The sound was jarring, intrusive, a rude awakening from their private world. He pulled his hand away from hers, his expression shifting from longing to something akin to panic. He glanced towards the patio table where his phone was lying, the ringing continuing its relentless assault on the silence. I should get that," he stammered, his voice tight with anxiety. Sarah felt a wave of disappointment wash over her, the intense anticipation deflating like a punctured balloon. The moment was gone, the connection broken. The world outside rushed back in, shattering their carefully constructed reality. The ringing persisted, insistent and demanding. Mark hesitated for another moment, his eyes meeting hers, a silent apology passing between them. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he reached for his phone, the interruption effectively ending their intimate encounter. The spell was broken. Sarah watched as Mark answered the phone, his voice low and guarded. She couldn't make out the words, but she could tell from his tone that it was a serious conversation. The intimacy they had shared just moments before seemed like a distant dream, replaced by a wall of polite distance. A strange mix of disappointment and relief washed over her. Disappointment that the moment had been interrupted, that she hadn't gotten to see where things might have led. But also relief, a sense of escaping a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of her control. She had pushed the boundaries, taken a risk, and for a moment, it had felt exhilarating. But now, faced with the potential consequences of her actions, she felt a twinge of fear. Maybe it was for the best that they had been interrupted. Maybe she had gotten in over her head. The steam continued to rise, obscuring Mark from view, a fitting metaphor for the uncertainty that now clouded her mind. She wasn't sure what she wanted, what she expected. All she knew was that everything had changed. Mark hung up the phone, his expression unreadable once again. He avoided her gaze, busying himself with adjusting the jets in the hot tub. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, a silent communication passing between them. He didn't apologize for the interruption, didn't offer any explanation. He simply looked at her, his eyes conveying a message that transcended words. It was a subtle agreement, a shared understanding that this wasn't the end. That something had shifted between them, something that couldn't be ignored or easily forgotten. It was a promise of more to come, a silent acknowledgement that their story was far from over. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that sealed the unspoken pact. It was a subtle reassurance, a silent confirmation that, despite the interruption, despite the complications, there was still something there. Something worth exploring. The steam continued to swirl, carrying with it the weight of their unspoken promises. She stood up, the water cascading off her body in glistening rivulets. She grabbed her socks and sneakers, her movements deliberate, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. The air outside the hot tub felt cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the water. She didn't say anything, didn't offer any parting words. She simply turned and walked towards the gate, her back straight, her head held high. She wanted to appear strong, confident, in control. As she reached the gate, she paused, turning back to look at Mark one last time. He was still sitting in the hot tub, watching her, his expression unreadable. She met his gaze, holding it for a long moment, a silent message passing between them. It was a mixture of challenge and curiosity, and a hint of something more, something that she couldn't quite define. Then, with a slight smile, she turned and walked through the gate, leaving him alone in the steamy heat of the hot tub. The gate clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the silence. The game was afoot. Back in her own house, Sarah took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the lingering heat and the confusion that swirled inside her. But the memories of the afternoon clung to her, refusing to be scrubbed away. She replayed the entire encounter in her mind, analyzing every word, every gesture, every look. Had she been too bold? Too reckless? Had she completely misread the situation? Or had she actually succeeded in sparking something real between them? She didn't know. She was filled with a jumble of conflicting emotions: excitement, fear, uncertainty, and a strange sense of anticipation. She had stepped outside her comfort zone, broken free from the confines of her small-town existence, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. But one thing was certain: she was no longer the same girl who had walked past Mark's house that afternoon. Something had shifted inside her, something had awakened. She had tasted freedom, and she wasn't sure she could ever go back. The summer stretched ahead, no longer a source of boredom, but a landscape of endless possibilities. Alone in the hot tub, Mark replayed the afternoon in his mind, his thoughts a tangled mess of desire, guilt, and fear. He had known Sarah since she was a little girl, a pipsqueak tagging along with her older brother. He had watched her grow up, always from a distance, never seeing her as anything more than the kid next door. Until recently. He couldn't deny that he had noticed her transformation, the way she had blossomed into a beautiful young woman. He had tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as a fleeting infatuation. But when she had walked through that gate, everything had changed. He knew it was wrong. The age difference, the power dynamic, the potential consequences, they were all flashing red warning lights in his brain. But he couldn't deny the attraction, the spark of something real that he had felt between them. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight with frustration. He was stuck, caught between his desire and his conscience. He knew he should walk away, put a stop to this before it went any further. But he also knew that he didn't want to. The thought terrified him. What was he going to do? Later that evening, as Sarah was scrolling through her phone, a text message popped up. It was from an unknown number. *Hey, it's Mark. Hope you're not catching a cold after your little dip. Winky face star. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the message, her mind racing. He had her number. How? It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had reached out. He was acknowledging what had happened, confirming that it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. The game was definitely afoot. She typed a quick reply. *just warming up. Winky face star. She hit send, then tossed her phone on the bed, a thrill coursing through her veins. The summer had just begun, and something told her it was going to be anything but boring. And,